The snow was falling in thick, silent flakes, blanketing the pine trees and turning the world outside my window into a perfect, untouched Christmas card. Inside the cabin, a fire crackled in the large stone fireplace, its warm light dancing on the rustic wooden walls. I was curled up in a deep armchair, a mug of hot chocolate in my hands, the silence broken only by the fire and the soft sigh of the wind. This was my Christmas. Alone, peaceful, and exactly what I wanted. The peace was shattered by the sound of engines. I frowned and went to the window, peering down the long, winding driveway. It wasn't one car, it was a convoy, a large SUV, followed by two smaller sedans, all struggling up the snowy path. I recognized the lead vehicle. It was my father's. My heart, which had been so calm just moments before, tightened into a cold, hard knot. I had known this was coming. I had hoped I was wrong, but I had prepared for it anyway. I was standing by the door when the banging started. It wasn't a knock. It was an angry, insistent pounding. "Clara, open this door right now. We know you're in there." It was my brother, Ben. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my sweater, and opened the heavy wooden door. They stood on the porch, a united front of fury. My brother, Ben, his handsome face twisted into a smug sneer. My parents, Richard and Susan, standing behind him, their expressions a mixture of disapproval and righteous anger, and behind them, looking deeply uncomfortable, was a man holding a toolbox. A locksmith. "Fun's over, Clara," Ben said, trying to push past me into the cabin. "This is family property, and you need to leave." "We're changing the locks." I didn't move. I held my ground in the doorway. "Don't make a scene, dear," my mother said, her voice sharp and cold. "This cabin is for your brother. He needs it. You have your little apartment in the city. This has always been intended for him." They looked at me, expecting me to argue, to cry, to make a scene. They saw me as I had always been in their eyes, the quiet, emotional one, the one who always backed down. They saw me standing here, alone on a remote mountain on Christmas Day, completely isolated and helpless. They thought they had me trapped. I looked at their angry, entitled faces. I looked at the locksmith, who was now avoiding my gaze, and I felt a profound, unshakable calm settle over me. I smiled. A small, polite smile. "You're right," I said, my voice quiet. "You should come in." "It's cold out there." I stepped aside. Their confident smirks widened. They thought I was surrendering. Ben strode into the cabin like he owned the place, my parents following close behind. They stopped dead in the middle of the room. Their expressions of triumph instantly collapsed into pure, slack-jawed shock. Sitting in the armchair opposite mine, bathed in the warm glow of the fire, was a man in a perfectly tailored three-piece suit. It was Mr. Peterson, my lawyer. He held a thick, leather-bound legal document in his lap. He looked up at them, his expression unreadable. "Richard, Susan, Ben," he said, his voice calm and professional. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." He gestured with his head towards the corners of the room. "I'd advise you to be mindful of your words. The new surveillance system is state-of-the-art. Audio and video. Everything you say is being recorded." My family stared, speechless, at the small, discreet black domes of the security cameras I had installed in the corners of the ceiling. And then, as if on cue, another sound cut through the silence, the sound of a siren, faint at first, then growing steadily louder as it came up the mountain road. A moment later, the flashing red and blue lights of a sheriff's vehicle painted the snowy landscape outside the window. I stepped back to the open doorway and looked at my family, at their pale, panicked faces. The locksmith, realizing he had just walked into the middle of a legal minefield, was already backing away, packing up his tools. "It seems you have another visitor," I said. The confidence, the arrogance, the certainty that they could bully me into submission, it all vanished in a heartbeat. They were no longer a powerful family putting their difficult daughter in her place. They were trespassers, caught in a trap they had been too arrogant to ever see. And their Christmas was about to get a whole lot worse. The confrontation on my porch on Christmas Day was not a spontaneous event. It was the final explosive act in a long, quiet play of family dynamics. The first scene of that final act had taken place a month earlier in a family group chat. The chat was titled Prescott Family Christmas, a name my mother had chosen years ago to give us a sense of grandeur we didn't possess. It was usually a place for sharing photos and bland life updates, but in late November it became a flurry of excited messages. Clara, my sister-in-law, I found the most amazing resort in Aspen. It has a spa and ski-in, ski-out access. We should all go for Christmas week. Mom, oh, that sounds divine. What a wonderful idea, Clara. Your father and I would love that. Ben, count me in. I could use a vacation. Book it. The messages flew back and forth. They talked about flights, ski lessons for the kids, reservations at fancy restaurants. They were planning an expensive, week-long luxury holiday. I watched the messages pop up on my phone, a silent observer. No one had asked me if I wanted to go. No one had included me in the plans. Finally, after they had discussed the details for an hour, I typed a simple message. Me. This sounds fun. What are the dates? Let me know the details, and I'll book my flight. The chat went silent for a full 5 minutes. I could imagine the frantic private messages flying back and forth between them. What do we do? She wants to come. We didn't account for her. Then a reply from my sister-in-law, Ben's wife, appeared. It was dripping with fake, polite regret. Clara. Oh, Clara, I'm so sorry. The booking was for a family suite and it's already completely full. There's just no more room. We should have thought of that sooner. Next time. My mother immediately chimed in, her message a classic example of her passive-aggressive style. Mom. We thought you wouldn't enjoy it anyway, dear. It's all so social and loud. You've always been happier at home with your books and your computer. You're better off having a quiet Christmas by yourself. And that was it. I had been officially, politely, and ruthlessly excluded. They didn't want me there. I was the awkward, quiet daughter, the one who didn't fit into their loud, boisterous idea of family fun. I was the responsible one, the one they called when they needed money or help, but I was not the one they wanted around for the good times. This had been the pattern of my life. Ben was the golden child. He was charismatic, charming, and perpetually irresponsible. He was always starting some new, brilliant business venture that would inevitably crash and burn, leaving him in a mountain of debt. And my parents were always there to bail him out, to praise his ambition and his daring. I, on the other hand, was the disappointment. I was a quiet, nerdy kid who grew up to be a quiet, nerdy adult. I became a software developer. I worked remotely. From my small, neat apartment in the city. I didn't have a flashy title or a corner office. Because I didn't talk about my work, they assumed it was unimportant. Because I lived simply, they assumed I was unsuccessful. They saw my independence as a rejection of them, my quietness as a judgment. For years I had tried. I had hosted holiday dinners they criticized. I had bought them expensive gifts they barely acknowledged. I had bailed Ben out of his financial messes more times than I could count. I had done everything I could to earn my place in a family that had already decided I didn't have one. Reading their messages, the fake apology from my sister-in-law, and the condescending dismissal from my mother, something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't a loud, angry break. It was a quiet, clean shearing of a rope that had been fraying for years. I typed one last message into the group chat. Me. You're right. A quiet Christmas sounds perfect. You all have fun. They would have read that as a surrender. They would have been relieved. The difficult daughter had accepted her place. They had no idea that as I typed those words, I was already opening a new tab on my computer, a tab for a real estate website that specialized in remote mountain properties. If they were going to leave me out in the cold, I was going to find a better, more beautiful cold to be in. I was going to give myself the Christmas they had just taken away. The decision was made in an instant. If my family was going to Aspen to create their perfect Christmas memory without me, I would create my own. But my memory wouldn't be set in a crowded, overpriced resort. It would be in a place of silence, stone, and pine. It would be in the mountains. My grandfather, my mother's father, had been a forest ranger. He had loved the mountains with a quiet, profound passion, a love he had passed down to me. When I was a child, he would take me on long hikes through the rugged, wild country a few hours north of the city. He taught me the names of the trees, how to read a compass, how to be comfortable in the deep, ancient silence of the woods. Those were the happiest memories of my childhood. For years I had harbored a quiet dream, to own a small piece of that wilderness. A cabin, a plot of land, a place where I could escape the noise of the city and the louder noise of my family. I had been casually browsing real estate listings for months, but the sting of my family's exclusion turned that casual dream into a focused mission. I am a software developer. I work for a major tech firm, but I do it remotely, from my quiet apartment. My family thinks I have a little computer job. They have no idea that I am a senior developer, that I hold several valuable patents for a piece of software I designed, or that my little job has made me, by any reasonable standard, wealthy. I don't live a flashy life. I don't drive a fancy car or wear designer clothes. My wealth is quiet, just like me, and it was about to buy me a mountain. I found the property online that same night. The listing was for a rustic log cabin on 100 acres of pristine mountain land. The pictures showed a simple, sturdy cabin with a large stone fireplace surrounded by a dense forest of pine and aspen trees. The property backed onto a national forest, meaning it would be forever wild, forever quiet. It was perfect, but it was the location that made my heart stop. It was on the north slope of a place called Prescott Mountain. The name was a strange coincidence. It was the same name as my family, but there was no relation. However, there was a story. A vague family legend my father loved to tell about a great-grandfather who had supposedly owned a huge tract of land in this area 100 years ago, before losing it all in the Great Depression. The story was part of the Prescott family mythology, a tale of lost glory that fueled their sense of entitlement. They had never been there. They had never seen it. It was just a story. I immediately called Mr. Peterson, my grandfather's old lawyer, a man I trusted implicitly. "Mr. Peterson," I said, "I'm looking at a piece of property. It's on Prescott Mountain. I need you to do a thorough title search. I want to know its entire history. I want to be sure the title is clean, with no old claims, no liens, nothing." "I'll get right on it, Clara," he said, his voice all business. 2 days later, he called me back. "The title is as clean as a whistle," he confirmed. "The land has been bought and sold 3 times in the last 50 years. There are no outstanding claims. The family story your father tells is just that, a story. There's no legal basis for any of it. If you buy it, it is yours, free and clear." That was all I needed to hear. I made an offer that day, a strong cash offer that was immediately accepted. Because there were no banks involved, we were able to close the deal in just 2 weeks. I signed the final papers in Mr. Peterson's office in early December. I was now the legal, undisputed owner of 100 acres of beautiful wild mountain and a rustic log cabin. I had treated myself to an entire mountain for Christmas. I didn't tell my family. They were too busy planning their Aspen trip, sharing pictures of ski outfits and fancy restaurants in their group chat. They didn't notice my silence. They didn't notice that I was no longer a part of their conversation. They had already forgotten about me. And as I packed my car for my first trip up to my cabin, a quiet sense of satisfaction settled over me. They thought they were leaving me behind. They had no idea I was already miles ahead, in a place they couldn't even imagine. While I was falling in love with my mountain, my brother was falling into a familiar hole. Ben had always lived his life on the edge of a financial cliff. This time, he had finally gone over. His latest, brilliant business venture was a boutique distillery. He had a grand vision of creating artisanal gin, complete with a trendy tasting room and a line of expensive merchandise. He had poured all his money and a significant amount of my parents' money into it, but Ben, as always, was all vision and no execution. He spent a fortune on branding and a fancy launch party, but he neglected the tedious details of permits, production, and distribution. The business imploded before he had even sold a single bottle. He was left with nothing but a mountain of debt, and the people he owed money to were not patient. He had taken out a high-interest, short-term loan from a private lender who was known for his ruthless collection methods. Ben was in serious trouble. He was desperate, and when a Prescott is desperate, they turn to their family's mythology. I found out later from Mr. Peterson, who had his ways of learning things, what happened next. Panicked and with his creditors breathing down his neck, Ben remembered the old family story, the story of Prescott Mountain, the story of the vast tract of land that was their birthright. He went to my parents, his face a mask of frantic desperation. "The mountain," he said, "great-grandfather's mountain. It's still ours, right? It has to be worth a fortune. We can sell off a piece of it, just enough to cover my debts." My parents, who would do anything to protect their golden child, seized on the idea. They didn't bother with lawyers or official records. Their sense of entitlement was their only compass. The story was true because they wanted it to be true. They hired a local surveyor in the mountain town, not to check the title, but simply to mark out a valuable 10-acre parcel with road access that they could sell quickly. They were already counting the money. The surveyor arrived at the property a week before Christmas. He drove up the long, winding driveway, past the new, prominent private property no trespassing signs I had just installed. He got out of his truck and began to set up his equipment. That's when my new caretaker, a grizzled old mountain man named George, whom I had hired to look after the place, came out of the cabin. "Can I help you?" George asked, his voice a low rumble. The surveyor explained that he had been hired by the Prescott family to survey their land. George just chuckled. "Son, I don't know what story they told you, but the Prescott family doesn't own anything up here. This whole mountain belongs to a lady from the city. She just bought it a few weeks ago. Now, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is private property." The surveyor, confused and annoyed, packed up his equipment and drove back down the mountain. He called my father and told him what had happened. The reaction, I'm told, was explosive. My father was furious. How dare some lady from the city be on his family's land? He immediately called the county records office, and that's when he saw my name. Clara Prescott, the new, legal, and undisputed owner of the 100-acre parcel on Prescott Mountain. Their shock quickly curdled into a white-hot rage. They didn't see it as a legitimate real estate transaction. They didn't see it as me buying a property with my own hard-earned money. They saw it as a betrayal. In their twisted logic, I had known about Ben's financial trouble. I had known they were planning to use the mountain to save him, and I had swooped in and stolen it from under them. They didn't see me as a sister who had finally bought her dream home. They saw me as a thief who had stolen their son's birthright. The plan was hatched that very night. They were in full crisis mode, their Aspen ski trip forgotten. They would not be defeated by their quiet, difficult daughter. They would go up there on Christmas Day, when they assumed I would be alone and vulnerable. They would bring a locksmith. They would confront me, force me out, and claim what was rightfully theirs. They were so sure of their own story, so blinded by their own entitlement, that they never once stopped to consider that I might be prepared. They were walking into a battle, having no idea that I had already chosen the terrain, set the traps, and was waiting for them on higher ground. The drive up the mountain must have felt like a victory march to them. I can picture it perfectly. My father, gripping the steering wheel of his big SUV, his face set in a mask of grim determination. My mother beside him, nodding along as he rehearsed his speech about family duty and my selfish betrayal. And in the car behind them, my brother Ben, probably laughing with his wife, already spending the money from the land he was about to reclaim. They were on a holy mission to save their golden child, and I was the dragon that needed to be slain. They were so confident. They had their story, their sense of righteous indignation, and, for practical purposes, a locksmith. What could I, their quiet, lonely daughter, possibly do to stop them? They had been underestimating me my entire life. Why would today be any different? Their confidence carried them all the way up my long, snowy driveway, right to my front door. The banging, the shouting, my calm invitation to enter, it all played out exactly as I had anticipated. The moment they saw Mr. Peterson sitting by the fire, the entire atmosphere in the cabin changed. The hot air of their anger was instantly sucked out of the room, replaced by a cold, confusing silence. Mr. Peterson didn't rise. He simply placed the book he was reading down and looked at them over the top of his glasses. "Richard, Susan, Ben," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." My father found his voice first. "Peterson? What the devil are you doing here? This is a private family matter." "On the contrary, Richard," Mr. Peterson replied, gesturing to the thick, leather-bound document on his lap. "This is a legal matter, and Clara is my client." He then pointed a finger towards the corner of the ceiling. "I'd also advise you to be mindful of your words. The new surveillance system is state-of-the-art. Audio and video. Everything you say is being recorded." 3 sets of eyes swiveled upwards to the small, dark dome of the security camera. My mother gasped. Ben's smug expression had been replaced by a look of pure, dumbfounded shock. It was then that the sound of the siren grew louder, and the flashing lights painted the room in strobes of red and blue. A moment later, a uniformed sheriff's deputy appeared in the open doorway. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a calm, no-nonsense expression. "Everything all right in here, folks?" Deputy Miller asked, his eyes scanning the scene. "Deputy, thank you for coming," Mr. Peterson said, standing up at last. "My name is John Peterson. I'm Ms. Prescott's attorney. I called your office earlier to give you a heads up about a potential trespassing situation." He gestured towards my family. "It seems my concerns were warranted. These individuals have come onto my client's private property with the intent to illegally change the locks and forcibly remove her." The locksmith, who had been hovering nervously by the door, went pale. He immediately picked up his toolbox. Whoa, I'm out of here," he said, holding up his hands. "They told me it was a family dispute. I'm not getting involved in anything illegal." He practically ran out the door and back to his van. Deputy Miller stepped into the cabin, his hand resting casually on his belt. He looked at my father. "Sir, is it true that you are not the owner of this property?" "This is our family's land," my father blustered, his face turning a blotchy red. "It's a misunderstanding." Mr. Peterson held up the leather-bound document. "This is a legally executed and recorded deed showing my client, Ms. Clara Prescott, as the sole and undisputed owner of this 100-acre property. I have a copy for you, Deputy." The deputy took the copy and glanced at it. He then looked at my father, his expression hardening. "Sir, this is a legal deed. As of this moment, you and your family are trespassing on private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately." "You can't be serious," my mother cried. "It's Christmas Day. She's our daughter." "Ma'am," the deputy said, his voice patient but firm, "that's a family matter. My concern is the law, and the law says you are not welcome here unless the property owner says you are." He looked at me. "Ms. Prescott? Do you want these individuals on your property?" I looked at my family, at their shocked, furious, and utterly defeated faces. They had come here so sure of their power, so certain of my weakness, and they had run headfirst into a wall of legal and logistical preparation. "No, Deputy," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I do not." "Then you have 5 minutes to get in your vehicles and get off this mountain," the deputy said, turning back to them. "If I have to come back up here, it will be to make an arrest. Am I clear?" Defeated, they shuffled out of my cabin, their victory march having turned into a humiliating retreat. I watched them go, their cars sliding in the snow as they hurried away. The mountain was quiet again, and it was all mine. Their retreat down the mountain was only the beginning of their fall. The immediate consequence was a formal restraining order, which Mr. Peterson had served to them the very next day. It legally barred them from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. The order was a crisp legal document that turned their vague, mythological claims into a clear-cut case of criminal harassment. The message was simple: the game was over, and I had won. But the real collapse, the one that would shatter their world, had nothing to do with me. It had to do with my brother's desperation. The mountain land had been Ben's last hope. It was his Hail Mary pass, his one chance to pay back the dangerous people he had borrowed money from for his failed distillery. When that hope evaporated in my quiet, fire-lit cabin, his financial clock started ticking down its final seconds. A week later, the deadline on his loan expired. The lenders were not a bank. They didn't send polite letters or make phone calls. Their methods were far more direct. The first thing to go was Ben's business. They seized what few assets were left: a few copper stills, some unsold bottles of gin, the trendy furniture from the tasting room. They liquidated everything, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover the massive debt, so they came after him personally. They drained his bank accounts. They put a lien on his car. He was left with nothing. But the debt was still there, and it was growing every day with an astronomical interest rate, and that's when the final devastating domino fell. My parents, in their blind devotion to their golden child, had co-signed the loan. They had been so certain of Ben's success, so sure that the distillery would be his masterpiece, that they had foolishly, recklessly tied their own financial fate to his. When Ben defaulted, the lenders turned their full attention to my parents. The first call they received was from their bank. Their accounts were frozen. Their credit cards were canceled. The comfortable, upper-middle-class life they had always taken for granted was suddenly gone. The second call was from a lawyer representing the lenders. He informed them that, as co-signers on the defaulted loan, they were now legally responsible for the entire debt. A debt that had ballooned to a figure well over 6 figures. They had no way to pay it. Their savings were gone, poured into Ben's failed ventures over the years. Their only significant asset was their beautiful, sprawling home in the city's most desirable neighborhood, the home I had grown up in, the home that was the symbol of their social standing, the stage for their entire lives. They were forced to sell it. It was a fire sale. They had to sell it quickly to pay off the debt before the lenders took legal action to seize it. They got far less than it was worth. The sale was a public humiliation, a notice to their entire social circle that the proud Prescott family was in financial ruin. After paying off Ben's massive debt, they were left with almost nothing. They had to move out of their grand home and into a small rented townhouse in a suburb they used to make fun of. The Persian rugs, the antique furniture, the life they had built, it was all gone. Ben and his wife, who had also been living far beyond their means, were forced to move in with them. The four of them, who had once been so united in their arrogance, were now trapped together in a small, cramped space, suffocated by failure and mutual resentment. I watched it all from a distance, through the quiet, factual updates from Mr. Peterson. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt a strange, detached sense of inevitability. It was like watching a building whose foundations had been rotting for years finally collapse under its own weight. I had not done this to them. I had simply stepped out of the way. For my entire life, I had been the pillar holding up their unstable world. I had been the quiet, responsible one who bailed them out, who absorbed their insults, who played the part of the family disappointment. On Christmas Day, when they came to my mountain to take the one thing that was truly mine, I had finally refused to play my part. I had let go, and their world had come crashing down. The new year arrived on a wave of silent, crystalline snow. My mountain was a world of white and gray, the pine trees heavy with fresh powder, the air so cold and clean it felt like a new beginning. I spent my days in blissful solitude. I took long walks through the silent woods, my snowshoes crunching on the trail. I read books by the fire. The only sound the crackle of the logs and the sighing of the wind. I worked, my mind clear and focused, writing lines of code that felt as clean and elegant as the winter landscape outside my window. I was alone, But I was not lonely. For the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly at peace. I was the queen of my own quiet kingdom, and the borders were secure. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in January. It was from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but some lingering curiosity made me press the button. "Clara?" The voice was weak, hesitant. It was my mother. We need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't say anything. I just waited. "We're in trouble, Clara," she continued, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "Your father and we've lost the house. Ben's business failed. We have nothing. We need your help. You're our daughter. You have to help us." I listened to her, to the raw panic in her voice, and I felt nothing. The part of me that would have once felt a surge of guilt, of duty, of responsibility, was gone. It had been carved out of me by years of their casual cruelty. "Help you?" I said finally, my voice calm and even. "You mean like the way you helped me on Christmas Day?" "That was a misunderstanding," she cried, her voice rising. "Your brother was desperate. We were just trying to secure his birthright. We didn't know you had bought it." "You didn't know because you never asked," I replied, my voice still quiet. "You never once in my entire adult life asked me about my job, my finances, or my life. You just assumed. You assumed I was a failure because I was quiet. You assumed I was unsuccessful because I didn't live up to your shallow idea of what success looks like." "That's not true," she sobbed. "Isn't it?" I asked. "You stood on my porch and told me my home, the home I bought with my own money, was for my brother because he needed it. You decided that his needs, his wants, his failures were more important than my success, my peace, my property. You didn't see me as a daughter. You saw me as a resource you could tap into whenever your golden child messed up again." She was crying openly now, a pathetic, gulping sound. "But we're your family. What are we supposed to do?" I looked out the window of my cabin, at the vast, beautiful, silent mountain that was all mine. A mountain I had bought with the proceeds of my little computer job, a mountain that was my sanctuary from the noise of their world. "I don't know, Mom," I said, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something. Not pity, but a kind of sad finality. "You will have to figure it out on your own. My support was something you took for granted, and now it's gone. You made your choice on Christmas Day. You decided I wasn't part of the family, and I have decided to agree with you." I wished her luck. Then I ended the call. I went to my contact list and found her number. I blocked it. I blocked my father's number. I blocked Ben's number. I blocked every member of my family who had stood by and watched, who had chosen their side. I built a digital wall around my peaceful new world. I stood up and walked to the large window, looking out at the snow-covered peaks. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The mountain was quiet, strong, and unmovable. It didn't need anyone's approval. It just was. And for the first time, so was I. I was the queen of my own mountain, the master of my own life, and I was finally, completely, at peace.